Hello and welcome to Addressing the COVID-19 Crisis, an open forum webinar for pharmacists. I'm Michael Hogue, President of the American Pharmacists Association and Dean at Loma Linda University School of Pharmacy. We are so happy that you've joined us today. This webinar is designed for pharmacists, pharmacy technicians, and student pharmacists. However, we know because of the timeliness of the topic that we're covering today, that we have colleagues from other health professions who are also joining us today, and we welcome you into this conversation and this discussion. We're going to be discussing today the breaking information that we know about COVID-19 vaccines, everything from development and approval, allocation and distribution, and we're going to talk a lot about vaccine hesitancy as well today. As most of you know, the Food and Drug Administration is meeting today to take a look at one of the vaccine candidates to recommend or not emergency use for that vaccine. And so there's just a lot happening, and we're happy that you've joined us for this conversation. We're very excited to have a distinguished panel of guests that will be with us, and that includes Angela Gual, the epidemiologist. She's an epidemiologist at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and she currently serves as the lead on the CDC's pharmacy partnership team on the vaccine task force. She's an experienced researcher with demonstrated history of working with government administration and industry. Her MPH is focused in global health from Emory University, and she's currently pursuing her MBA. We'll be joined today also by Steve Foster and John Grabenstein, both who were with us last week. John is the editor of the Immunization Action Coalition's works and also the president of Vaccine Dynamics, longtime familiar face to APhA. And Steve Foster is APHA's liaison to the ACIP and a captain retired from the U.S. Public Health Service. We will also be joined by Mitch Rotholtz, Chief of Governance and State Affiliates for APhA and Executive Director of the APhA Foundation. Later in the call, we will hear from Elisa Bernstein, based upon some late-breaking news at the federal level, who will share with us insights from those we'll have some information coming on the federal level. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag at the beginning. We want to wait till the end to share some pretty exciting news with you. So Elisa will be joining us there. And if we get into a clinical pinch, Dan Zlott's always on the ready, and he's going to be with us to be able to take those questions as well if we have those that come up. Now, we're going to do a few things a little differently this week. And I'll go over that in just a moment. The first thing is we are offering continuing education for pharmacists today. And this is the disclosure list for the audience relative to ACPE's requirements. This is a knowledge-based activity. And here are our learning objectives. We will start by discussing the updates on the COVID vaccine, describing the process for approval, and review vaccine safety information and strategies to overcome hesitancy. Next slide, please. So let's test your knowledge, and we'll also see if you all have your clickers handy and everything's working well on your screens. Which of the following serious adverse events were seen in the Pfizer clinical trials? Very key words at the end there, the Pfizer clinical trials. Just take a moment and respond quickly as you get these questions. We want to test your knowledge up front. We won't share the results right now, but this will give you a chance to assess what you already know. All right, let's move on to the second question. The second question is, that's the same question. Let's move on to the next one. What is the name of the new CDC smartphone-based after vaccination health checker? Do you know the name of the health checker? We're going to talk about this, obviously, in today's program. I think this is pretty exciting, and hopefully you'll find it the same. All right, let's move on to our third and final question of the morning. Which of the following should a pharmacist not do when preparing to administer COVID-19 vaccination? What should you not do? I'll give you a minute. These answers are a little longer, so make sure you have time to read them and respond. All right, that's good. Now, today's today's webinar will follow our normal sequence. These times are just a guideline. I want to encourage everyone that if you have questions about the COVID-19 vaccine, please use the questions tab on the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll be receiving your questions beginning now and all the way through the end of the webinar. We will get to as many of those questions as we can. In the interest of time, I will be reading the questions that are submitted and asking them of our panelists. If we do not have enough time to respond to all of the questions, just as we did last week, we will post the response to most of those questions on our Engage platform, which is our members-only platform at pharmacist.com, and it's a way for pharmacists to be able to interact with each other. So we'll handle those questions there. We are going to limit today's questions just to those around vaccine, COVID-19 vaccine. If you have clinical questions about other topics related to COVID, you can go ahead and type them into the chat box, and as we're able, we'll post those answers in the Engage platform for response later. Now, I want to remind everyone that today's webinar is being recorded. Continuing education is only available to those who are watching this webinar live online. And for those who, however, want to review the material online, it'll be at pharmacist.com in the COVID-19 resources page. Your handouts today are found under the handout tab, and there's actually 3 handouts, 2 from the CDC and 1 that is the actual slide presentation that we're giving today. In the slide presentation handouts, all of the links are active and will take you directly to the resources that we're providing for you today. And hopefully you'll find that very helpful as we go forward. Finally, the last thing to mention to all of you is that you will need to stick around to the very end of the program today to get your CE code. So hang on to the very end. We can't email that code out if you leave early. So you'll need to stick on to the end if you would like to receive CE for today's program. So with that, I'm going to invite all of our guests to join me on camera. And we're going to jump right into this discussion. So if there's John and Steve. All right, let's see. There's Angela. Thank you, Angela. Appreciate you joining us. Angela, I want to start out with you. First of all, I want to express the appreciation of the profession of pharmacy to the CDC for the great teamwork and cooperation and collaboration that we've seen between the CDC and APhA and CDC and the profession. So first of all, let me give publicly my thanks to you, and we hope you'll extend that thanks on to your colleagues at the CDC. And the first question for you is a big one. What can pharmacists do today to prepare to provide the COVID-19 vaccine? What would you suggest that we should do to prepare?
Great, and thank you for that. And I think, yes, on this slide, so our team is hard at work developing materials to help healthcare providers of all types, including pharmacists, on what to do to prepare for the COVID vaccines that are coming out. There are some limitations of what can be shared before an EUA is issued, but our team is working to provide as much information in advance as possible. So on the slide, you'll see there is a new module for healthcare providers on preparing for COVID-19 vaccination with the link there. And then if you click on that, you'll see that there are in particular resources on how to make recommendations to patients, how to talk to patients about COVID vaccine, and then the training tools that already exist, including trainings on how to do intramuscular injections, those things that anyone can start and refresh on now in preparation, especially for those who might not vaccinate as much as, or they'll be anticipating vaccinating a lot more when COVID vaccine comes out. Any refreshers, all of those materials should be linked there. And so this is a good place to start until we have more information that we're able to share and that comes out. There's also some other links that are will be distributed as well. There's been more information released on the CDC COVID data systems and what the reporting will look like. So there are links to that in the deck later for you to review as well. There's been some updates on storage and handling. There's an addendum added to our storage and handling toolkit to be more specific to the COVID vaccines and what we know about them so far. So again, more information will be released when the products have an EUA approval, but until then, we have added some materials there for providers to get started on that. And then there's additional information related to some of the safety monitoring as well, and we'll talk about that later today as well.
Well, thanks for that, Angela. And I just want to mention to our viewers that this is a website that you should bookmark, and you can also access a direct link from pharmacist.com in our COVID-19 resources. We have a link to the CDC's resources there as well in either place. But the information, as Angela said, is going to be updated very regularly. So I would encourage all of you to check back daily, because things are literally happening at that rate of speed right now. It's daily updates are happening, and we appreciate CDC being on top of that, and so we appreciate that. Angela, there's probably no topic more pertinent to pharmacists and really to consumers in general than vaccine safety. Can you talk to us a little bit about the ongoing efforts the CDC is undertaking in order to monitor vaccine safety once the vaccine starts hitting the marketplace and we start putting it in people's arms?
Absolutely. And for us here at CDC as well, vaccine safety is top of mind and of utmost priority for us as well. And I actually have my colleague on the line, Tanya, who is part of our safety monitoring team. So I'll actually ask her to walk through some of the systems that CDC is leveraging existing systems, and also a new system on how we'll be monitoring COVID vaccine safety.
Tanya, welcome to you. And I want to just mention that Tanya Myers is an epidemiologist in the Immunization Safety Office at CDC, and she's the team lead for the VSafe program. Tanya, we're anxious to hear this information.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about this today. So there are two systems that I think are the systems that pharmacists are most likely to interact with. There is a broader set of systems across federal agencies, but I'm going to talk about two of these platforms today. So on the slide that you have in front of you, the first of these is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. This is a passive surveillance system, so it's not conductive active outreach, but it provides a platform for patients, for vaccine providers, for physicians, for parents, for caregivers to report things that may be related to vaccine, health events that occur after vaccination may be related to the vaccines. So if, as a pharmacist, you provide a vaccine to a patient and they return to you and mention that they have had a health event, this provides you, as the provider of the vaccine, a way to file a report. The patient could also file a report. Don't worry about duplicate reports. We match those on the back end when that happens, but I want you to be aware of this system because there will be some reporting requirements for vaccine providers who become aware of potential adverse events after a vaccine to be filing reports for people that they have provided vaccine to. So this slide gives you some tools to learn a bit more about this system, and also it provides you with some resources if you do file a report and you have some questions. There's also a link to a video here that you can watch. It's relatively short, I think 8 minutes, and it walks you through step by step the reporting. So the one other thing I want to mention about VAERS, and many of you are probably aware of this, but this is really the nation's early warning system. So because it's a passive system, it's collecting reports. We don't always know what the underlying population is to be able to make a causality assessment. And so signals that are detected in VAERS are then followed up in our other safety platforms. Next slide, please. The second system that I want to mention is a new system that we will be starting up as soon as COVID vaccines are available to be given. So this is VSafe. It's an after vaccination health checker, and it provides active safety monitoring for COVID-19 vaccines. So I mentioned that VAERS is a passive surveillance system. VSafe is an active surveillance system. It's based around using smartphone messaging, so text messaging, to push out health check-in reminders to vaccine recipients. And once participants receive those text messages, they have in hand a URL that they're able to click on or to tap on that takes them directly to a quick 5-minute health survey. So this allows us to reach directly to participants, ask them to report side effects and health impact events after COVID-19 vaccine. And it includes an active telephone follow-up piece by CDC for reports of significant health impact. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that means in a moment. It also gives us an opportunity to follow up on people who may have received the vaccine and then realized that they are pregnant. So that enables some follow-up on pregnant women, which is an important piece. Typically, pregnant women are not enrolled in phase 3 clinical trials. I believe there were maybe over 20 in the Pfizer trial. I haven't looked to see exactly what safety data Pfizer has on that at this point, but this is going to give us, as these vaccines roll out, particularly to healthcare workers for whom a large proportion of that workforce is female, it gives us a good opportunity to create a pregnancy registry to follow these pregnancies and infants following COVID vaccine. The next slide, please. So this gives you an idea what this health checker does. The vaccine recipient will register and receive text messages from the system. They will in turn complete their health surveys. And if you look at on the left-hand side of the slide, if they indicate that they have missed work, been unable to do normal daily activities, or receive medical care, they will receive a call from the CDC call center to follow up, and that will result in filing of a VAERS report. So that will give us a way to really assess what is happening with folks that have reported these health impacts. So I do want to mention that this wasn't created out of special concerns about COVID vaccine development, but it was due to this anticipated authorization under EUA, knowing that we will be vaccinating large numbers of people in a short time frame. And this gives us a very, hopefully with some help and promotion from our partners who are providing vaccines to people, we'll be able to enroll a large number of folks who have received vaccine and really be able to follow them post-vaccination. So we would encourage you, as you provide vaccines, to promote VSafe. There's an information sheet and a poster that are, I believe, included as attachments on this call. So those are things that we would like for you to provide to vaccine recipients, or perhaps to post in your clinic. And then we ask that you also report adverse events to VAERS if you have a patient report back to you. And the tools that Angela has already shown you in previous slides will get you to the information you need to discuss more specifically how to do that.
Great. Tanya, that's fantastic information, and I'm excited to hear about VSafe. And I know both pharmacists and consumers alike will be very excited to see this active surveillance system implemented. Again, I'll remind our listeners that in the handouts tab is a link to the VSafe poster that you can use in your healthcare facilities and pharmacies, especially as we know these first doses of vaccine are headed toward hospitals. I know we have a lot of hospital pharmacists on our call today and hospital pharmacy directors. Feel free to use these posters within your facilities to help advocate even with healthcare professionals about VSafe. We want to promote this in a very big way. One of the things Tanya mentioned, and I'm going to skip around just a little bit here, I'm going to ask John Gravenstein to talk about pregnancy and the Pfizer vaccine, because we are getting a lot of questions, and today's chat box has quite a few of them, and we've gotten a lot of questions previously. Can a pregnant healthcare provider receive the Pfizer vaccine? What do we know about that at this point? And then, so I'll get John to comment a little bit more on what was in the Pfizer study. And then, of course, Angela and Steve, if you want to jump in and share more as well, you're welcome to do so. John?
Sure. Tuesday, the Pfizer and FDA review documents were released And Tanya mentioned that there were several women who became pregnant during the study, but they haven't been followed very long, so that there are no newborns yet or no miscarriage rates yet to analyze. So we don't have specific data to compare the control group and the vaccine group in that regard. So pregnant women were not intentionally sought for this study, so that we're in an absence of data zone. And so there's this tension between, we normally withhold vaccines for pregnant women except if there's a major risk of that infection to that woman, like influenza vaccine and Tdap for pregnant women. I think in a couple of days we're going to know where ACIP comes down on whether to give it or withhold it. Certainly you'd inform the woman fully. I don't get a vote, but women encounter immunologic stimuli all the time, so I'm a withholder, but we'll see what the ACIP says.
And I think another comment that's worth making is that we wait to see what the emergency use authorization approval from the FDA might say, but it's highly unlikely, based upon the data that we've reviewed and that we've seen, that there'll be any contraindication for use of the vaccine in pregnancy. We don't anticipate that at all. I think that at this point, there's nothing to tell us that with good information that it would be okay to offer the vaccine to pregnant women. Angela or Steve, do you want to comment on that any further? Angela, are you any comments there? No comments, everything? Okay, so it looks like John and I covered that pretty well, and no further info on that one. John, how about sharing again a review of what we know about these two mRNA vaccines that are coming in pretty rapid fire succession next week and the week after?
So we know more now than we did last Tuesday. The briefing documents came out for the VRBPAC, the FDA Advisory Committee for Vaccines, is meeting today and now. If I glance down at the screen, I'm looking at the other screen with the presentation slides there. So we can fill in that right-hand column with a lot more detail than we could last week. So 40,000 volunteers. We now know the confidence interval around that 95% efficacy. It's 90 to 98%. That's pretty tight. That's pretty good. That now note that that's after the second dose. I'll talk about that more in a minute. We now know the stratification of older and younger volunteers. 94% in one group, 96% in the other group. Those are so close to each other. They're within each other's confidence intervals. They're the same number. So the answer to your patient is it works just as well in older folks as in younger folks, statistically. There was one case of severe disease in the vaccine group, 9 in the control group. These are small numbers that I'm going to show you, and these subgroup, now it was also a little curious that it was only a 10 total. I expect the VRBPAC to kind of focus on that in a couple hours, and in a couple hours I'll tell you what they say. There is some indication that there is some efficacy after the first dose. If you looked at the people, if you include between dose 1 and a week after dose 2, there were fewer cases in the vaccine group than the control group, but you still want to get that second dose to get you to earn yourself the 95% badge. And there's a little evidence that prior infection doesn't matter. There were fewer cases if you had all comers, 50 versus 275. So it's far better to get the vaccine than to not get the vaccine. There were only 153 in that 16, 17-year-old cohort. We'll see what the FDA says about that.
Yeah, and let me just comment, that's one thing that is different from what we shared last week. For those of you who are joining us the second week, we originally thought that the EUA application was going to be for 18 years of age and older, and we learned with the filing this week that it actually goes down to age 16. Most of those 16-year-olds won't be prioritized necessarily unless they're volunteering in healthcare settings or something of that nature. But I would just call that to everybody's attention, because that is a little different than what we shared with you last week, and we learned that through the EUA filing from Pfizer. Okay, well, let me
We'll fill in
also.
the Mrna column
Oh
next
yeah.
Tuesday, because Tuesday we'll get the Mrna details. So
That's right. So everyone can pay attention there to the FDA's VRBPAC website, because on Tuesday next week, Moderna's phase 3 trial data will be made public, and you'll be able to see that as well. Now, if we go on to the next slide, John, I think we've got a little more information too to share about the common adverse events that were found in the phase 3 trial with the Pfizer vaccine.
but first, the Mrna column is in gray because it comes from their press release, not the detailed analysis. It's what we know so far, and we'll know more next Tuesday. For BioNTech Pfizer, the common adverse events are what shots hurt, and there's the numbers that back that up. 84% injection site reaction, 63% fatigue. This is mild to moderate a day, noticeable, but quickly dissipates. The serious adverse events, depending on which one, it was 0% to 4.6%, a little more after dose 2 than after dose 1, fewer in the older group than in the younger group, but importantly, no meaningful imbalances between the study arms. All the things that happen to unvaccinated people happen to vaccinated people, and but they they're at the same rate, so there's no reason to attribute it to the vaccine. Deaths 2 in the vaccine group, 4 in the control group. So obviously not, deaths happen, especially in big populations, but not because of vaccination, no concern about vaccine causing death. Curiously, there was a finding that wasn't anticipated, which was that Bell's palsy, which is a muscular weakening on one side of the face, it causes the face to sort of droop on one side, usually a transient phenomenon of a few weeks. 4 cases in the vaccine group, 0 in the control group. That's interesting. It was not statistically significant, but that's a big difference, and that's going to come up later this afternoon with VRBPAC, I'm quite sure, and may well end up getting mentioned in the fact sheet that gets distributed with these things. So you should brush up on what Bell's palsy is, because it may come up in conversations that you have. And then the final piece is we talk about safety and efficacy, but there's a third element that FDA is hyper focused on, and that's production quality. And in FDA lingo, that's chemistry, manufacturing, and controls. And the FDA says looks good. They're able to manufacture it well and consistently.
All right. Well, we've gotten dozens and dozens of questions already from our audience. And yes, John, go ahead.
Sorry. So in the newspapers yesterday were reports out of the United Kingdom that surely is in the question box about 2 cases of anaphylactoid reactions in recipients in the early rollout in Britain. And anaphylactoid meaning it looks like anaphylaxis, but nobody's really sure the cause. It's a more vague term because they're not sure what it was. Surely the FDA is reaching out to the British counterpart to get more detail about this. That may get mentioned in the fact sheet that you get. So that's brewing, and soon we'll all know more details about that.
And we'll try to make a point of next week sharing with you what we learn over the next week about that particular issue. Now, Angela, I have a question for you. Vaccine information statements are typically what we provide with vaccines, but John's referenced something else here. What is the CDC providing to healthcare providers so that they can meet the VIS requirement, and how are those going to be disseminated?
So there will be an EUA fact sheet that will come from FDA that will take the place of, because we won't have a licensed vaccine yet, so we'll not have a VIS like we're normally used to, but there will be a product that will take the place of that can be used for those conversations and discussing benefits and risks with patients as well. So there will be something coming out. It might be a little bit different this time, just because it's an EUA product, and that'll be something that FDA will be providing, but we are also in discussions with them too and reviewing that.
So Angela, can you tell us, will those vaccine fact sheets be available electronically online, or will they come in the kits that pharmacists and other healthcare providers will receive with the vaccine?
I believe the plan is that they'll be available electronically and online. I do not know if they'll be able to come with the kits. I know that they're still finalizing some of the parts of the kits, but I believe the plan right now is for them to be available electronically.
Okay, and do we expect that to be available over the weekend or early next week? Pretty soon after the FDA gives authorization, I would assume.
I believe so, but I don't know the exact timing, but the intent is for it to be shortly after.
Okay, that's great. That's very helpful. I want to just ask Steve Foster a question real quick. Steve, are you anticipating that ACIP is going to make any specific recommendations for the Pfizer vaccine, assuming that it gets emergency use authorization today? Will there be any Pfizer-specific product recommendations?
And just to preface that up a little bit, if you remember last time we went over the evidence recommendations framework and talked about the things that were non-specific to one vaccine, but we did not talk about the benefits and harms, which is specific to a vaccine. So each vaccine that comes out will have the discussion. And in fact, we already have a meeting scheduled tomorrow and continuation of that same meeting on Sunday. And at the end of the day, what they're going to do on that is talk the specific Pfizer vaccine. They're going to go through a great analysis and then again complete the evidence to recommendation framework. And then scheduled on Sunday, there is a vote scheduled for 3 o'clock Eastern time. So if anybody wants to turn in to see that, you can go to the CDC website and be able to connect. But yes, there will definitely be a vote on Sunday about this vaccine, assuming, again, everything goes well today.
Yes. And Angela, also related to the material that you covered, will the V-Safe system be available in Puerto Rico? Will it be available there as well? I would assume yes, since it's a U.S. territory, and Guam?
Yes, it will be available, and part of the benefits of a web-based solution. I did actually just have a colleague ping me who's on right now, and the EUA fact sheet will be available as soon as issued. So,
okay, great. And will the fact sheet be available in languages other than English? Will it be available in Spanish or other languages out of the gate?
I do not know that, so I'd have to follow up on that question.
Okay, that's a great question. We'll try to get the answer. And if it's available in other languages, we'll have access to that at pharmacist.com and the COVID-19 resources page. APHA will make sure that everyone has access to that through our link, so you can always check back there. Now, John and Steve, I want to call on both of you here to help cover a couple things we've got on the next slides. John will let you start, and Steve will let you comment on this. We definitely know there's vaccine hesitancy out there. Can you just quickly run through some of these, and I'll just remind our audience you'll have these for reference and be able to refer back to the details of this after our webinar today, but we'll cover some of the high points on these next two slides. Maybe not every
brush
point.
off all you learned in communication class, because you're going to find some skeptics and some naysayers and some just confused and questioning and puzzled people. So let's help them. And kudos to CDC for giving me a bunch of suggestions on this list. So, and there's more detail at that website listed at the bottom. So you want to start they're going to have questions or objections, and you're going to want to start giving them some response. You don't dump. I've got a whole bunch of stuff here, and we'll go through it. But you comment, you listen, you watch, you comment, you listen, you watch. You know how to do this. So how do we know if these vaccines are safe? Well, they've been studied in a large study, larger than other drugs. Over 30,000 volunteers in each of the studies, all sorts of ages, also all of the races, all of the ethnicities, some of the greatest representation yet. This is about the same number of people that were studied when Shingrix was first licensed. No safety steps were skipped. That's a common question for assertion. And this has been, this is available from, this is pushed by politics. No, it was the career scientists at FDA who did all the review. I've heard the vaccines cause a lot of side effects. Well, shots hurt. You come right back and acknowledge it because it's true. The most common side effects are, I gave you the numbers, about 1 in 10, 1 in 20 people develop the more serious one, the more severe ones. Most people don't have any problems after being vaccinated. Your arm is going to be sore, warm, warm to the touch, red. That'll last a day or two. That's the immune system revving up to deal with the vaccine in a good way. Nobody knows whether these vaccines have long-term safety effects. Well, it does take a long time to accumulate the experience. The common side effects are well understood, and you wouldn't believe the list of all the different programs that FDA and the CDC are running. The lady who presented that to me took 10 minutes to tell me all the different ways that that safety is being monitored. It's pretty impressive. And they go, it's not just the government people, they go show it to independent experts. Next.
Now, Steve, before you go to the next slide, let me ask Steve a question real quick. Steve, you've looked at the Pfizer data in great detail as a part of the ACIP. You know, if a healthcare provider who's in the first group getting a vaccine were to develop a sore arm, or let's even say a fever, how long is that going to last? What was shown in the Pfizer data? How long do those adverse events typically persist?
Well, let me point out also the fact that as John said, we do expect side effects, and in fact, I expect side effects every time I've gotten a vaccine since I've gotten to this ripe old age. I've had a red arm all the way down to my elbow, and they last a couple days and they go away. It's because my system reacts differently than someone else's system would. So everybody reacts antigenically different. So the assurance, one of the insurance things I think to tell people, and I hope pharmacists are one of the first ones in line to go get the vaccine so they can say to their patients, I've had the vaccine already. That's an important statement to go through too. But we're talking a couple days where they have a little pain or redness or swelling that goes along with that, and then that should go away after that. We'll know more again after the data is presented to us officially.
Exactly right. And I want to point out again, recognizing that we have a lot of hospital pharmacy directors on our call today, the thing that many people in health systems are concerned about is the occurrence of fever following vaccination, which means that individuals might need to stay home for a day or two until the fever resolves, since it would be indistinguishable as to whether it was from the vaccine or from COVID. And that's generally the approach that's taken. In the Pfizer study, fever occurred typically not on the first day when you first received the vaccine, but on day 2 most frequently, and it usually resolved within 24 hours in the vast majority of participants who experienced fever. So just so that you're aware, you know, you can time when you receive the vaccine, maybe the day before your off weekend or days off, or your shift work, and you can time it in a way that will help you hopefully not have to miss time off work. And again, the incidence of fever was relatively low. John, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think it was less than 10% or around 10%.
Yeah, remember the difference between fever and temperature, right?
Right.
So how high matters, and the statistics vary by which number you're picking. So
sure. Mitch, you had a comment there? Mitch, you're muted. I'm sorry, can't hear you.
I'm sorry. So the CDC and some guidance it recently put out actually recommends that institutions look at rotating the timing of when individuals get vaccinated. So if in the same unit, you know, you've got people don't get it all at the same time, in case somebody has a reaction that has them have to step away. So this way, at least you're not without staff during this time.
Yeah. Okay, let me go on to the next slide. And John, if you'll cover this relatively quickly, I've got tons of questions I need to continue on with.
So this mRNA stuff is brand new. It's never been used before. It's way too risky. It's going to mess up my DNA. Well, you've got mRNA in you right now. If you didn't, you wouldn't grow new skin cells. You wouldn't grow new blood cells. Your kids wouldn't grow any taller. mRNA is a natural thing, and the vaccines are just going to harness that to make a protein that's going to immunize you. The technology has been studied for more than a decade. It's been in clinical trials at NIH. It can't cause the disease. It doesn't enter the cell nucleus. It can't change. It goes into the cytoplasm where all the other proteins are made. It can't change your genes. And wouldn't it be better to just get the natural immunity? Well, did you see that we had more deaths yesterday than on 9/11 or the attack on Pearl Harbor? Reframe it. It's a lethal disease, a lethal virus, and your vulnerability means you're vulnerable. And it's more than you could infect others. And getting vaccinated is the safer choice. It taps the body's natural abilities.
That's great. That's very good. I'm going to start taking audience questions. We've answered some audience questions already, but I want to get to a few. This first question I'd like to ask Mitch and Angela to respond to. The pharmacist that asked this question is wondering about our independent ambulatory care practices and how they will get vaccination if they're not associated with a large health system. How will they get vaccine, or will they need to go to a chain community pharmacy to request the vaccine? What is it? What advice do you give to pharmacists that are working in ambulatory care clinics that are freestanding? Mitch, I'll give you the first shot at that, and then Angela, maybe you can talk a little bit about the federal distribution plan.
Sure. So mine's going to be pretty quick because Angela will be able to give more specific. But during phase 1, that distribution will be not controlled, but directed by the state health jurisdiction. And so how it gets implemented within your community will be guidance issued by the state or local health department, and then working with the health facilities in that community will determine how healthcare providers in that community will get vaccinated. And when I say healthcare providers, that includes pharmacists, whether they be in hospital or community settings. And so that'll be worked out within a community. So Angela, anything to add?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right in terms of how to access vaccine to get vaccination, especially when there's a limited supply and maybe not vaccine in all different locations in a state at a given time. Michael, I don't know if you want me to go into kind of the other piece of it and getting vaccine in terms of being able to vaccinate others. Is that, do you want me to do that now?
I would like for you maybe to comment on, a lot of our audience today are community-based pharmacists, and they're curious when they might start seeing vaccine arrive in their pharmacy to be able to immunize patients. Can you give us any sort of a timeline or a rough estimate? It's not going to be next week. I think the first doses, we're pretty clear now, are headed to states that'll then be distributed to long-term care facilities and to hospitals. But what about community pharmacies?
Sure. So I think in terms of, so the exact timing is a little bit harder to give, but I'll give you how we're thinking about this and how this might, how we're thinking about how supply might impact kind of the timing of all of these pieces. So as you mentioned right now, we're going to start with really limited supply. We've called that in our planning as this kind of phase 1A, and there'll be initial groups recommended per ACIP to receive vaccine as part of this initial group for vaccination. And then, there'll be other groups that will be recommended too as well in this beginning phase. And that really, at that time, the allocation will be given to states to distribute to their providers. And so, states, as depending on the population, may also want to use different types of providers. That could include pharmacists as well. So I think one of the questions I get asked a lot too is there a role for pharmacies and pharmacists to play in this beginning part? And very well may be, especially in different states based on their different geographies and topographies and where their locations are, certainly in rural areas too. The pharmacy may be the main source of healthcare services for a particular population. So I think the different states are coming up with their different plans for these initial groups, which may include enrolling some pharmacies as well in that. And if that were the case, you would, as a pharmacy, enroll directly with the state or the jurisdiction that you are a part of and that will be receiving the vaccine. As we anticipate that supply will increase, right? And so as supply increases, the goal of the program is going to move from these really targeted initial groups to how do we reach the most people and increase the number of access points for COVID vaccine. And so this is really where we want to leverage a lot of the community pharmacy infrastructure that's already out there. I mean, you guys are already out there vaccinating your community. So one of the questions that we were having was how do we tap into that? And this is kind of based on a lot of the work that's been done since H1N1 and in the decades since, really, on this pandemic planning on how to best utilize pharmacies for this purpose. And so out of that came our federal pharmacy partnership program. And actually, I think there's a slide on that, if you wouldn't mind going to that. And the idea behind this program really is that as supply increases and there becomes enough supply, there'll be enough supply for there to be a federal allocation that will be separate from what the states receive. States will continue to receive allocation, but that as supply grows, there'll be additional supply where where we really need to think critically about how do we get this out to the general population. And so we have brought on through our federal program 21 different retail and long-term care pharmacy partners, because we recognize too we do have a federal long-term care pharmacy partnership program as well, knowing that a lot of these long-term care facilities do rely on their long-term care pharmacies and pharmacists to provide vaccination services. So those are kind of the two groups that we're mainly targeting here, and the partners are listed on this slide. This represents about just over 40,000 pharmacies, locations, and which I think there's 60,000 total in the US. So it's quite a bit, and we have quite a few members on board here. For pharmacists who are either part of one of these organizations, these are the organizations that will be receiving vaccine for a federal allocation when enough supply becomes available. You'll also see here too, we do have some PSAOs and other networks, cooperatives also on board here too. So they're being brought on because we recognize, that there are a lot of different types of pharmacists that we're trying to engage here, including independents. So we did bring on different types of partners to reach different types of pharmacists as well. And so a lot of this enrollment, and you likely, if you are part of one of those networks, have been getting outreach from them to sign on to our federal program through them, as they are the partner helping us manage that. And so this federal program is going to be occurring, the timing of when we have enough supply is really the critical question everywhere in the response that we're trying to sort through. I think, in terms of when we'll be able to start this program will really depend on when we think there's enough supply to support broader vaccination outside those initial target groups, and also to do it in a way that we can turn on nationally, so that when we do turn on, there is vaccine going into every single state as part of our partnership. We certainly want to make sure it's equitable and how we think about turning this program on. And so there'll be considerations, and we're also looking at the supply projections too. And so a lot of different planning going on. It hasn't been finalized yet, but that's currently our thinking here, is that, when we have a lot of supply, we want to have an easier mechanism in terms of distribution to providing vaccine to these pharmacies. That being said, we know that this plan is not designed to include all pharmacies. That just, we can't possibly do that with bandwidth that we have here at the federal government. That being said, states will be enrolling providers to provide vaccine throughout this response as well. And so our hope here is to really capture as many as we can through the partners that we have, and then any additional providers that the state wants to enroll as well, they can do so, and you can enroll directly with the state that way. So if you're part of one of these organizations, then, if you're part of one of these chain organizations, then you are included. If you're part of one of these networks, you can get enrolled through one of those networks. I mean, if you're not part of either of those, you can reach out to your state and jurisdiction to express your interest in being a COVID-19 provider or vaccine provider.
Great, that's great information. Steve, you wanted to add real quickly, I'll let you do that.
Real quickly, the main key is that the supply is not going to be out as fast as we'd like it to be out. And the point of it is that the first supply is going to be out, is going to go to a very targeted supply. Now, the targets themselves will be determined, a lot of it locally, because we've made suggestions with ACIP, we've made recommendations, but again, that's what they are, because when it gets out to the state, it's going to be really what happens there. I will tell you that there's as many people in the health departments in the small rural areas of America that have no clue what's going on either, just like the pharmacists that are out there too. So just be flexible, be willing to jump in and help where you can, and that's all we can say for right now.
Yeah, no question that flexibility is the word of the day. This is evolving. We've never experienced this situation in any of our lifetimes, and so we're doing something on the fly here. I think we're got good plans in place with the CDC, and we'll just continue to adapt and adjust, and of course pay attention to what's going on in your state, because each state will have a little bit different way that they're going to approach the execution of vaccine distribution. So pay very, very close attention to that. Now we're very close on time, and I've got dozens more questions. I'm going to take just a couple more questions, and I'll ask for brief answers from our panelists so that we can take some of these hopefully in rapid fire succession. Are people still at risk of COVID-19 infection after dose 1 and before dose 2 is given? Quick answer on that, John?
Yes.
Yes, you're still at risk of it. That's exactly right. Okay. Do patients have to use the same pharmacy for both doses of the vaccine?
No.
No.
The answer is no.
Yeah.
No.
The answer is no. Just note that the vaccines are not interchangeable, so the patient has to get the same vaccine for both doses.
Got to get the same brand. Okay. Angela, what if somebody doesn't have an electronic device? They don't have a cell phone and can't download vSafe. Is there any kind of record card or anything else that can be used?
And in that case, I'll have to follow up on that, but I think that's where VAERS also will come into if they call their pharmacist and report that in as well. We'll catch that through VAERS. We are trying to make vSafe as accessible as possible. So, yeah.
Making sure healthcare providers do need to know that if you've got a patient who doesn't have a cell phone, then let's offer to help them report if something comes up and you're not sure. Questions about vaccine stock, Mitch. We're worried that if we don't have enough, will we be guaranteed that we're going to get enough doses for that second dose? So we immunize somebody, and are we going to get an equal number of doses coming to us for that second dose?
So key message there is do not hold back on supply. So when you get your supply, use it, because on the back end, as part of the process that Angela talked about, they will be reallocating for your second dose. So it'll be in the allocation for your follow-up. It's important to document what you have on stock, document when you administer it, because that then triggers your restocking, I'll call it, for your second dose.
Okay. And John, I want to ask you to reiterate something you told us last week. How long is a reasonable amount of time for a dose that you draw up to sit in a syringe?
Use it as fast as you can. Don't let it linger. You probably didn't label it. And then there's the protein plastic interaction thing, and follow whatever's in the sheet. It's probably going to be a few hours, not more than a few hours. But don't forget the medication error risk and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I'd like to add one thing to that is the technique. Pharmacists need to pay close attention to their technique. We don't need for adverse effects to be reported because of poor technique.
Yeah, so don't forget Mrna, shoulder injury from shooting too high. A lady in my church choir got it from her pharmacist. So make sure you go to the belly of the muscle.
That's right in the central portion of the deltoid for this vaccine. And again, Pharmacist.com, in the immunization resources section of our website are videos that will help you know about how to correctly administer vaccines. Well, that's all the questions we've got time for today. We've got tons and tons of them that we could cover, but we don't have time today to cover them. I'm going to ask our guest or thank our guest for joining us today for this program. Again, if we didn't get to your question, we will take some time to answer some of those questions on the APhA Engage platform, which is our members only platform for COVID-19 conversations. And we've had some great discussions on there this last week. If you're not an APhA member, we'd encourage you to join so you can take part in the conversation. Now, I want to cover with you just a couple of things of what's coming and some things that are out there. First of all, I wanted to just mention to you that there are a couple of resources that have been released in the last week by our partners. This is a resource that was released by the Department of Health and Human Services. It is really for anyone who has more information or wants more information. Individuals can register to participate in a clinical trial on COVID vaccine here. They can sign up for treatment trials. They can talk about donation of plasma here, and it tells them the steps to take. And then if you're a provider, it says doctor here, but that means doctor broadly. Your doctor's a pharmacy, so that means you. It tells you about what options you have available and how you can access those options. So that's what's available on this website. In addition, a partnership between several organizations has provided this COVID vaccine facts website that has a lot of consumer-facing information that you may find helpful. We ask that you probably bookmark this page. And then the last thing is I want to cover with you is that much of what Angela talked about today, and as well as Mitch, is covered in the COVID-19 vaccination program playbook for jurisdiction operations, and there's a lot of details in there that will help you as you're planning your programs. Now, what's coming from APhA? Well, first of all, you should check your email inbox, because just yesterday there was an email that we sent you about on a legislative and regulatory updates. We send these out periodically where we break down the latest information. APHA has been working closely with the current administration as well as the Biden transition team to ensure that pharmacists are represented in those areas. And so you can read more about that in yesterday's email that came to you. In addition, there was a amendment to the PrEP Act that came from HHS, adding a little bit of clarification about what the pharmacist training requirements are for pharmacists to be able to prescribe COVID tests and vaccines and to be able to do the administration of those. There was also clarification about the CPR requirement. We've updated our resource at pharmacist.com to reflect those changes. So that would be something important for you to take a look at as well. I think you'll find that resource very helpful. Now, we also have a wonderful resource discussing vaccine hesitancy. John and Steve covered several things related to helping to advocate with your patients to receive the vaccine. But we have an entire resource on this topic of vaccine hesitancy, and I commend the APHA staff for putting this together. It is a great resource. I really encourage you to take a look at it. It will help you and your pharmacy staff in being able to deal with questions that come up based upon the vaccines, and so we encourage you to use that. Now, next week on December the 17th, we will not be offering continuing education for our program, but because we have had hundreds and hundreds of people joining our weekly webinars about COVID vaccine, and because there's so much that's going to be happening in the next 7 days, we're going to dedicate an hour and a half to our weekly show next week. And we're going to do most of it by sharing just brief information up front and almost the entire time just responding to your questions. And so it'll be a big Q&A session. We will have our representative from the CDC that will be here, but we'll also have John and Mitch and Steve joining us, our expert panel, and we will respond to every question we can possibly get to as it relates to COVID-19 vaccines. As you know, the Mrna vaccine will be considered next Thursday, and by the time we have our webinar, the first Americans will likely have received the Pfizer vaccine, and we'll have an awful lot of excitement about that and going on, and I'm sure a lot of questions as well. Now, I want to call on a colleague just real briefly. Elisa Bernstein, would you please share with us some breaking news that happened just this morning related to the profession of pharmacy?
Thanks, Michael. I am thrilled to share that pharmacy was handed a big win today by the U.S. Supreme Court. In a unanimous decision, the court upheld an Arkansas law regulating PBMs. The case is Rutledge v. PCMA, and rarely does a pharmacy case reach the United States Supreme Court. What's significant about the Rutledge decision is the court set a clear roadmap for states to follow in crafting their laws to regulate PBMs. And so if states follow this roadmap, pharmacy wins from coast to coast over PBMs, not just in Arkansas. And so now we'll look to states to pass or amend their laws. APHA was pleased to support the legal case with a friend of the court brief, and we are so grateful for our Arkansas Pharmacists Association colleagues and in their tireless efforts leading the way for pharmacy. It's a big win for pharmacists and patients, and it really calls for a legitimate celebration. So back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Elisa, for sharing that great news. A red letter day for pharmacy, and we're so excited about this development. Now, for those of you who want the CE, which of the following serious adverse events were seen in the Pfizer clinical trials? In the Pfizer clinical trials. So respond quickly, folks, to this question, and we'll get your answers in. We'll see where you're at. All right, let's close the poll. So 56% of you actually got it right, none of the above. The key here is the Pfizer clinical trials. While there have been some anaphylaxis-like reactions reported in the news media yesterday from our British colleagues, that was not a part of the Pfizer clinical trials. That's part of post-marketing surveillance. So didn't mean to make the question tricky, but none of these things were actually seen in the Pfizer clinical trials, and it emphasizes the importance of why we need to do post-marketing surveillance and why we need every pharmacist promoting the V-Safe program so that we can identify safety signals as early as possible. Let's go to the next question. What's the name of the new CDC smartphone-based? Oops, I gave you the answer on the last question. I mentioned the answer to this. Let's see if we can get your responses here. What is that app-based program? Okay, let's close the poll. Well, we just nearly got the whole audience who got it right. V-Safe, that is pretty important and pretty exciting. So thank you so much for that. And lastly, which of the following should a pharmacist not do when preparing to administer COVID-19 vaccination? And of course, this is a current day question. So what should you not do? And we'll receive your responses there. You might remember that Angela covered with us what the distribution process is, and that's exactly right. Manufacturers will not be distributing the vaccine directly to pharmacies at this point or taking orders for them. The federal product will be coming through the state organizations or the CDC. So thank you for that. Thank you all very much for joining us this week for our weekly COVID webinar. We look forward to seeing you again, same time, same place next week. In the meantime, let's celebrate the wins for pharmacy and let's start vaccinating our patients this week, including ourselves. So get your vaccine. Next week, we're going to ask on our poll, how many of you in the audience have received your dose of the vaccine? Have a great day and God bless.